Calling 911 may get you evicted from your home. In Pennsylvania, as well as other states, there are laws on the books which allow police officers to force landlords to evict tenants that police have deemed nuisances. Yes. Right. For instance, like Lakeisha Briggs. Lakeisha Briggs has been a repeat victim of domestic violence by her very violent ex-boyfriend. Police were called to her house several times between January and May of 2012, but police said she never showed signs of physical injury, so basically they wrote her off as a pain in the ass. Well, eventually her ex-boyfriend must have done something wrong because he landed himself in prison. The article did not specify why, but it was involving an incident between the two of them. And eventually, however, he got out of prison, of course, and when he came out of prison, he went to her house and bullied her, forced her to let her in the house, and basically just stated that he was moving in. She had already been warned by police officers, and so she was afraid to try and stop him or to call the police because she knew she faced the risk of being evicted from her home.
Now, one thing to add to that is that she actually had the personal protective order out against him when he was in prison. So I think I think his prison term has something to do with being a domestic abuser.
So he moved himself back in, but a week later, Bennett was his name, beat the hell out of her, slashing and stabbing her with a broken ashtray and leaving many marks, including a 4-inch gash in her neck. She begged, in spite of this beating, in the process of being beaten, she begged her neighbor not to call the cops because then she would be evicted from her home. And right after she begged her neighbor not to call, she lost consciousness, and then her neighbor called the cops anyway. The cops came to her home, arrested her boyfriend, well, ex-boyfriend, for assault, and she was airlifted to Philadelphia for emergency treatment. Now, while she was being treated, the police decided that that would be a good time to serve Briggs' landlord with an order to evict her within the next 10 days, or face losing his rental license.
That's real classy. I'm sorry. That's real classy. She gets beat up, and then she gets evicted for getting beat up.
Yep.
What?
The police said that she was a nuisance and that...
for getting beat up, she's a nuisance.
Yeah, she's a nuisance and is a potential hazard or danger to the neighborhood and other people around her.
How much is this a case of blaming the victim? How much
Absolutely.
of a case? This is a 100% case of, yeah, well, you're getting your ass kicked? Well, that's your fault. Sorry.
Yeah, and what a way to kick you when you're down, too, and to dissuade people from calling the cops and asking for help.
Yeah,
this is a good way to get people killed.
Right, because they don't want to call the police.
Right.
No, well, you're going to kick me out of my apartment. And here's the interesting thing, reading the article earlier today. These nuisance laws are mostly set up to affect low-income and African-American neighborhoods.
Of course. Yeah, I was going to mention that, of course.
And it's, well, those black people, they're a nuisance. We don't want them calling us. We don't care.
Yep.
As if black people, the African community, doesn't trust the cops enough. As if they're not mad enough and don't hate the cops enough. Now they have the police saying, if you call us, we're going to get you kicked out of your home. This is disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
This is absolutely disgusting. But please continue.
The ACLU did file suit against the city for trying to evict her. They said it was unconstitutional, and the city eventually backed down. After the ACLU filed a case against them, the city backed down about evicting her. but she's still going to move. She's still going to move so that her ex-boyfriend can't find her once he gets out of jail, which of course he will.
Right.
But yes, this law discriminates case after case. It's obvious that it discriminates against predominantly poor and predominantly African American communities. And 1/3 of these cases involves domestic violence. Now, the purpose of these laws, supposedly, the way they put it, was to get the so-called scum out of the neighborhood, the drug dealers and the repeat violent offenders. Well,
that doesn't make any sense. Because if you can't call the cops and the drug offenders because they're going to evict you, then who's going to... Look, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
It's criminalizing the victims. That's what it's doing, and it's making people less likely to call the cops, and thus it's going to lead to more problems. It's going to lead to more deaths and more violence, and people already look down on poor and black neighborhoods and say, you know, how unruly and uncivilized it is, and it's just going to make this worse. It's just going to perpetuate it. It's the ACLU lawyer, Sandra Park, said, quote, "This turns victims of crimes into nuisances in the eyes of the city and limits people's ability to seek help from police and punish the victims of crimes." That's exactly right. That basically sums it up right there. It creates criminals of the victims.
Right, and here's another thing. If you can't call the police when you're getting your ass kicked, who can you call? What are you supposed to do?
You have no one. You just have to take it.
You don't have anyone.
Right, just like the poor woman Lakeisha Briggs. She felt like her only choice was to let the asshole in, because if she called the cops, she was going to get evicted. Either let him in or get evicted. But he beat her up, and the cops were called anyway, so she almost got evicted anyway. It's a lose-lose situation for poor people.
And this just shows who the police. Now, I'm not saying all police, but this shows kind of who the police, for the most part, work for. And they don't work for the poorer neighborhoods. They don't work for the African Americans. They work for the large multinational corporations. You can only look at the NYPD and see that, right? And not only that, because I've got some proof to back that claim up, in case anybody is watching. According to a Supreme Court decision in 2005, this decision states that the police do not have a constitutional duty to protect you from harm. They just don't.
Yeah,
and this was in a New York Times article published back in 2006. And it says, and this is from the article, it says, quote, "The decision with an opinion by Justice Antonin Scalia," where do we hear that name? "And dissents from Justices John Paul Stevens and Ruth Bader Ginsburg overturned a ruling by a federal appeals court in Colorado. The appeals court had permitted a lawsuit to proceed against a Colorado town, Castle Rock, for the failure of the police to respond to a woman's pleas for help after her estranged husband violated a protective order by kidnapping their 3 young daughters, whom he eventually killed." This is a horrible story, and you notice some of the parallels to this story. Now, there weren't any kids involved, and thanks God, right? And nobody died, but nonetheless, you've got that boyfriend or husband that's an abuser that comes around and just, threatens violence, and she tries to go through the right channels. She tries to call the police, and they just won't help her. And I got another thing for you to notice here. The woman's name in the 1999 case that I'm going to get into in Castle Rock, her name was Jessica Gonzalez.
Oh, of course. And of course, Lakeisha Briggs. I have not seen a picture of this woman, but Lakeisha is not typically a Caucasian name, is it?
Bingo. And I'll explain a little bit of the case to you. On the night of June 22nd, 1999, Jessica Gonzalez tried to get the Castle Rock police to find and arrest her estranged husband, Simon Gonzalez, who was under a court order to stay 100 yards away from the house. Now, Mr. Simon Gonzalez ended up taking their 3 children, ages 7, 9, and 10, as they were playing outside, and called her later to say, "Oh, don't worry, we've got them at an amusement park in Denver." Well, Mrs. Gonzalez called the police, and they said, "Well, yeah, there's nothing we can do." And the only action that was taken was later when Mr. Gonzalez arrived at the police station shooting a gun with the bodies of the 3 dead girls in the back of his pickup truck. And, of course, when it threatened the police, they killed him.
That's one of the more horrible stories I've probably ever heard.
That's horrific. It leaves you almost speechless, because can you imagine, you know, that happening to your children? Of course, you never will see that happen to your children because you're Caucasian. You're not black and Latino, which apparently these laws seem to target.
Well, the problem is that
and it's low-income people too. It's not just about racism. It's also about, you know, being poor as well. Because
right. Unfortunately, yes, I'm Caucasian, but I'm also poor. And actually, recently, I had an altercation with my ex about something regarding our visitation with our daughter, my daughter, and I asked the cop when I called him, is he actually allowed to take her and do with her what he will? And he said, well, as long as he comes back in time for the end of the visit, he can do whatever he wants and take her wherever he wants. And there's nothing you can do until something horrible already happens. Yeah, it's just, the system is not set up to serve the common people. It's not set up to help poor people. It's not, and those are the people that need help more than anyone. And as usual, the people that need the most help are the ones that are least likely to find it.
It's just, you know, it's a. I have no words for this. I mean,
yeah,
you know, we know who the establishment is there to serve, and it's not to serve us. It's to serve the multinational corporations and the donors, and that's it. I mean, and of course, one more thing to bring in is the fact that if the police aren't there to protect you, who is? Well, since a conservative Supreme Court made this decision, right? There were majorities conservative back then as well. Conservatives love to say, well, since the police can't get to you, you should go buy a gun.
Right.
And that's what it comes down to. I think that's one of the major reasons why they came up with this, you know, with why they made their ruling. I don't think that they were acting on constitutional grounds at all. I think they're just saying, well, we don't want to waste our time protecting African Americans and Latinos, and if we get more people guns, that also helps our donors. I mean, maybe I'm going a little conspiratorial Alex Jones, but, you know.
It is, whether or not
it's an interesting way to look at it.
Whether or not you are right in the fact that it may or may not be true that they mean for that to be the design specifically, that is what is happening. And I think that they realize, whether they did it on purpose or not, that this is the way it's happening, this is the way it's worked out, and I think they're trying to perpetuate it and keep it running that way.
Yeah, and it serves a specific ideological, you know, purpose.
When you grow up and you're a kid and you learn about police officers in school, you learn that if there's one job the police has, it's
to protect and serve.
To protect and serve the innocent, to help people, basically, and that's exactly what they are not doing. And
they're too busy making marijuana arrests.
Right.
In most cases.
Yes, but in most cases, absolutely. Our jails are overflowing with non-violent drug offenders, and people who actually are violent often end up getting out on parole and having shorter sentences than the people that were sent to prison on drug charges.